Today on the Paper Wings podcast, interview with cartoonist for Scholastic and Simon & Schuster, Jimmy Gownley.
Elevate your visual storytelling with the Paper Wings Show. I'm Chris Oatley, former Disney visual development artist and founder of the Oatley Academy of Visual Storytelling.
I'm Laura Innes, writer, graphic novelist, and creator of the Dreamer webcomic published by IDW.
And I'm Justin Copeland, filmmaker and storyboard artist for Marvel and Warner Brothers Animation.
Our connected world offers infinite reach and visibility.
There is no reason to let time, money, and self-doubt bring you down.
We're here to help you find your voice, perfect your craft, and create stories that draw a crowd.
Find us online at paperwingsshow.com.
It's the Paper Wings Show! Woo!
Yes!
Did you set that one out entirely, Laura?
I did on purpose.
What? I tell you what.
Oh, man,
Mike yells at me. I don't clap very often at performances and things. And it's not that I don't enjoy it. It's like the guy on stage doesn't know.
I actually prefer the awkward, specific affirmation after the clapping kind of dies down between songs. So I'll shout things like, "That was a very good song." or it's fun, it's several songs in, to yell things like, "I preferred that song to the previous one." You know, I do. And it's great because it's like, oh, that's some actual feedback, you know? That's really, it's actually, oh, good to know. Good to know.
Good to know.
No need for a survey.
Let's set right now.
Exactly.
There's that weird guy in the hat back there who liked that song better than the last one.
It is. And everybody always laughs because it's such a funny, it's an unexpected.
You're gonna be watching some animated feature of mine one day, and I'm gonna do that. And I'm gonna make some character do that in the crowd, and that's the best shout out of your life.
And sometimes it's fun to get super classy about it. Superior effort. That's one I use from time to time.
Oh, man.
Anyway, Scott Weiser, you're on the show.
Yeah, dream come true.
It's amazing.
One for that.
It's amazing that you're here, buddy. So for the wingers who don't already know you, most of them probably do because we talk about you and you're always there in the comments. Scott has been around from the beginning, right? I mean, the very early days of the Paper Wings podcast.
Yeah, I think episode number 1, I was there.
Wow, that's amazing. And then did we meet initially at CTNX, or did you and I and Laura as well meet in the comments of the podcast episodes?
No, I met you at CTNX.
Okay. And then our relationship, it really kind of developed in the comments section. And then... Yeah,
exactly.
Right. And then you took painting drama at the Oatley Academy.
I did. Best class I ever took.
Oh, that's awesome. And then we, let's see, then of course our relationship grew through that as well. And then any other ways? Are there any other kind of significant points of the evolution of our friendship that I should share? What am I forgetting?
I think several CTNXs we ended up crossing paths and having some really remarkable interactions. So
it's so good. And so you're here because on this episode we have Jimmy Gownley, an interview with Jimmy Gownley, and we're discussing kind of the nuts and bolts of making creator-owned content. And we had been discussing with you about how your Kickstarter campaign was impressive and successful, and we'd been wanting to talk to you about that. And so you're here now to kind of discuss the specifics of your Kickstarter campaign, and so we'll get into that now.
Okay, great. Well, the project was called Vanishing Ink. It's an illustrated hardcover novel. My dream is to develop feature animated films, so it started as a development for that, and then I thought, well, why not do it as a book, and I can make some money on it and start to gain some momentum with that side of my skill set.
So what's Vanishing Ink about? Did you always have this story in your head, or is it an idea you came up with just to do this novel?
I came up with the idea in a Paper Wings contest that we had, like at the very beginning of Paper Wings.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It's been a while.
It was one of the illustrations I did. Yeah. And at that point, it was just this guy with a pen this giant pen drawing. It's since evolved to become about a magician named Von Gold, and he's washed up because he's made some pretty bad decisions in his life. So his whole world is just crumbling around him. But as his world's like metaphorically crumbling, he also notices that things in the world start disappearing, and he's about to find out that he's the one that the people who drew the world are going to give the commission of redrawing the world, pretty much.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool idea. Now, the thing is, I've been reading about you more, and I've known you for a couple years now, just like off and on. But I was reading more about the project. You mentioned in a quote that there were some DreamWorks artists and other animation professionals who were interested in the idea or liked the idea. How did that come about?
Oh, I've been building a relationship with a few directors at DreamWorks over the past few years, and they actually backed the book. They're one of the biggest backers of the book.
Oh, that's exciting.
Another one of the DreamWorks artists is Jason Brubaker. His quote's on the back. Then we have Chris Oatley, who's a Disney artist, former Disney artist, who has his quote on the back of the book as well.
That was your first mistake.
That's like the most valuable quote on there, Chris.
Awesome. Now, is Vanishing Ink something that you would consider maybe a project that you can do, I don't know, sort of like a creator-owned project yourself, or is it something that you'd still like to maybe sell to bigger studios?
So you're talking about turning it into a feature film, or?
Yes, because you said it started out as a featured, an animated feature project, correct? Like you wanted to get it made into a film?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There are some cool things coming up that will put the filmmaking process in the hands of the artists, as well as the funding and the profit. So, and they actually talked about me doing that with them, and the person I talked to actually also backed the book at $200. So, we're talking about doing that in the future. I don't know if it'll be this idea or another one, though. I have so many ideas I want to do. It'll be a matter of finding the right idea and getting people excited about it, I think.
So Kickstarter, did you look at this kind of as a test run for what you have planned ahead?
Absolutely. My number one goal was to prove to the industry that I could develop a feature-length film story and some visuals, and that I could be an integral part of that process.
So can you tell us what Kickstarter was like for you, the struggles of the up and the downs of it?
Well,
I'm going to be as positive as I can, because I feel really good about it now.
It's over. You met your goal. Did we lead with that? He met his goal. You surpassed it.
Yep, 16,217, I think. And the goal was 12,000.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
So, and we were wise. I worked with a guy who he's raised like millions of dollars on Kickstarter in the past little while, and he was wanting to do it at 20,000, but luckily we lowered it because we wouldn't have ever hit that otherwise. So I'm glad that we lowered it right before we started to 12,000. The biggest challenge and the biggest reason for the success was salesmanship. It was all about selling the book over and over to hundreds of people. And I had the way I started the project is I had about 100 people who I knew were going to buy on the first day. And then truth be known, they didn't actually buy that day. About half of them bought that day, and then half bought the next day. And some people still waited till the end to buy. But then from there on out, it was contacting people who have a big influence online and trying to convince them, sell to them the idea of sharing the book with their audiences. And it was a challenge because a lot of news syndicates and stuff, they've already been advertising for Kickstarter for a while. They've been talking about Kickstarter. And so it's hard to convince people that your project is special, you know?
Your video was a big part of that, I think, or was it?
I think the beginning of the video is great. There were things in the end that I would change if I were to do it again.
Can you go into? Can you give us an idea of what the video was, and then maybe elaborate on that a little bit? I loved it. I loved the video. Well, we talked about it at length.
Well, and if you want, we can get a version that you can post up on the.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah. So people can see it. It's pretty much just a trailer for the book. And then the rest of the video is kind of me talking about my story about how long I spent in unemployment and how this is kind of a way of me getting out of that, and just kind of my attitude throughout the whole thing, and how they should support me because it's also a great story that they would enjoy. And that was what we were trying to do. I think there were too many people telling me what to do with the video, if that makes sense.
Too many voices.
Yes, absolutely. I still had so many opinions coming at me that it's hard to even know what exactly to fix. But I think I would I would keep it in a more tight bubble as I developed the video. More with people that I know and trust rather than, because my friend, he put it out to tons of people that I didn't even know. And they were giving me this feedback. And I'm like, how do I even process that feedback? You know, and still get this thing going.
I think that circle of trust thing is really important. When I was creating my Patreon page, I sent it out to, I don't remember, maybe 5 or 6 really trusted friends, and got really, really great focused feedback. And most of the points were pretty unanimous. There was like maybe 1 or 2 diverging opinions on something. And then I kind of checked with the rest of the group and they had agreed with my gut on that. And so I stuck with it. But yeah, I think sometimes when you open it too wide, it becomes overwhelming then to really focus in on what's legitimate and what's not.
Yeah. And I had to take a step back and say, you know what? I'm glad that all these people are saying these things. They're interesting to me. But I need to go and talk to some friends that I know will be honest with me, but at the same time will tell me what's working already. And at that point, that's where I made the video where it is now, which I think it's a strong video. I just think in the future, if I do another one, that I can do a better job.
You did kind of a Walt Disney sort of, kind of deliberately over the top goofy kind of thing. And, and I just was cracking up so much, because I think I kind of understand your sense of humor, and I just like you as a person so much that it just felt very intentional and very crafted. What do you think about that in hindsight?
A part of that is that I filmed it alone. Wow. There was nobody else there with me. I just set up the camera and I turned the little viewfinder toward myself, and I just tried to do my best to make it feel natural.
Right.
I think that most people actually got the joke. I think, over 10% of the people who saw it bought the book.
Oh, wow.
Or contributed in some way. So that's a really high conversion rate.
Yeah.
And then the people who saw it, who I wanted to see it in the industry, like those directors and different people, like even you, Chris, your reactions made it worth it. I felt like I hit the right audience, and I was able to deliver the message. So
to segue sort of a little, Laura, you recently launched your Patreon. Was that something that you considered? I mean, speaking for myself, I feel like you have a very large audience for The Dreamer. Is that something that you had in mind as you were doing your video?
Yeah, and Chris and I had a conversation about that. You always want the chance that if somebody is unfamiliar with what you're doing, that they watch it and then that they can enter in and they're not completely lost. But I definitely... my whole Patreon is aimed at my readers who already love the book, and we've sort of on the eternal quest of how do you monetize a webcomic. This seems like the next logical step, and it's a perfect fit for what I'm doing. And so, how do I give my readers what they want more of? And then how can I in turn take my fan base and then try to make some financial return on that? Hopefully Patreon's that sweet spot in the middle.
I think your Patreon is great.
Thanks, Scott.
And yeah, man.
And I think your project is one that will grow because people recommend it to each other. I tell people about The Dreamer all the time. If somebody likes comics, I'm like, you've got to check out this one because it knocks it out of the park.
Oh, shucks. Thank you.
I too share The Dreamer love. I think that on the note of designing your crowdfunding campaign for the people who are your existing fans, your most hardcore fans, I think it's kind of, I was about to say common knowledge, but I don't know if it's common knowledge, but I think it's kind of one of those things that's out there that a lot of people know. When it comes to crowdfunding, there's actually not a lot of discovery donors, people who pledge just because they found your cool project on the Kickstarter site or on the Patreon site. It's people that you bring to that site. Right. They already were fans.
Well, that's the big misconception. People think you can put a project up and that you'll just all of a sudden get all these new fans. And that's not the case. It's all about making connections with the people who already are interested in what you're doing.
Scott, I know you've already made friends with most of the wingers out there, but those who want to connect with you, where can they find you online, social media, etc.? And then, like you said, we'll get that video and put it on the blog post associated with this podcast episode so people can see the video. But where can they find you and connect with you online?
Well, I'm on Twitter, Scott K. Weiser. And then I want to give you a link that is a kind of a sign up for when my book releases on Amazon. I'd like people to go on there and give me their email so I can let people know and can spread the word that way if that's possible.
And of course, Laura, you should say the link to your Dreamer Patreon.
Yeah, you can find the Dreamers Patreon at Patreon/The Dreamer. We
have no shortage of exciting new announcements for the beginning of 2015. Justin, we are, at the time that this episode will release, we will be right in the middle of the audition process for the new generation of films on paper. That's exciting.
Wow, yeah, it is. I didn't realize that. I didn't put the dates in my brain.
We're time traveling right now.
Yeah, yeah, man. I'm excited, especially as it gets closer to the date. This will be the second time around for me teaching films on paper, and as I'm going through the lessons over again, all of these memories are flooding back into my head when I was teaching it the first time, and I'm just I don't know, man. There's sort of like an honor, to it. I feel really good right now, about films on paper, Gen 2. So yeah, that's coming up, man. I'm getting really excited about it.
Me too.
Well, today I'm excited because we got a guest on Paper Wings that I have wanted to have on the show for a very long time. Get ready. We've got Jimmy Gownley, who is doing pretty much exactly what we all are trying to do when it comes to making comics. He started out self-publishing his own series, Amelia Rules, and was schlepping it across the country at comic conventions, had his own publishing company that he was using, that he created, and then he got picked up by Simon and Schuster and it exploded. And so this is a topic that I've heard a lot when I'm just talking to independent creators in the comic book industry on how do you get to that next level? How do you break in at one of the big publishers, not at the comic book publishers? So Jimmy has been with Simon and Schuster, and then his latest book is through Scholastic's graphics imprint. And he really just kind of pulls back the veil and just talked us through the whole process, how it happened, what it looks like, and you'll get to see how everything changed for him. But, the cool part is that it all started from everything we talk about right here at Paper Wings. So this is a really nuts and bolts kind of an episode. Sometimes we talk about the inspiring big creative things, and we get to that too. But this one really, I think it's one of those practical episodes to really walk you through this idea of self-publishing, and then how do you take that, once you're successful at that, how do you take that to the next level? And I know a lot of our listeners are asking that question, and I think Jimmy's got some really great answers for you.
Jimmy, if you could just begin by giving us some of your background and lead us up to the point at which you decided to actually start crafting comics specifically. Like, how did you arrive at that art form? And maybe that's before it actually became a professional pursuit.
Really, it goes back to being a toddler and my mom wanting me to learn to read. When I was really, really young, just like at 2 and 3 years old, my mom started teaching me to read. And the first way she would teach me to read was by reading Peanuts comic strips. And the other thing she did was she would make flashcards for me, and I would take them and I would actually tape them to the wall in a sequence. So if it was like boy and a car and a house, I'd put them up. So it's like the boy got into his car, drove to his house. And I was making these little comic strips with these flashcards my mom made me when I was just tiny. So I think from that point in, like, the form was just hardwired into my brain. And when it sort of went to the next level is actually what my latest book is about, which is called The Dumbest Idea Ever, which is when I was in 8th grade, I got chickenpox. So I was out of school for 2 weeks with chickenpox. And then right after that, I got pneumonia. So I was out of school for like another 3 weeks with that. And I was just, wow. Yeah, I was just lying there on my mommy's couch, dying for 5 weeks. It was terrible. But there was this show on one day towards the end of my, convalescence. And it was all about comic books. This was 1986. And at the end of the show, they had a special guest who was this guy that owned a comic book store in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Now, I grew up in a town that had like 1,200 people. We didn't have any kind of store. We had one little, convenience store. That was about it. And I could not believe that there was a store on the face of the earth that sold just comic books. It was going to it, I say, was like the moment when Dorothy opened the door into Oz. It was just so shocking to me. So when I got better, my dad took me to the store and I went and I bought a bunch of comic books, things like ElfQuest, Love and Rockets, Zot, The Spirit, and one of them was Cerebus. It was the greatest thing in the world. It was the funniest, most ambitious, strangest, coolest comic book. And I bought 2 issues of it. And I asked the guy, what's the story with this? And he said, well, it's a self-published comic book. And they just 2 guys put it out. And at that moment, I thought, this is my path. This is what I'm going to do. It just literally changed my life. And I decided to do that. I decided I was going to publish a comic book, but the one I decided to do, it was the 80s and I was a comic book kid. So I had an idea for a comic book, which was to combine Star Wars with the Lord of the Rings and then, have it happen after a nuclear war. It's because that is the one idea an 80s comic book kid would have. But I showed it to my friend Tony. He hated it. He thought it was derivative and stupid and no one would read it, especially not girls. And he said, well, why don't you write a comic book about us? And that's what I started doing. And I started publishing comics about, fictionalized versions of me and my friends when I was just in high school and selling them out of my locker. And I've been pretty much doing that ever since. I'm just getting bigger lockers, thankfully.
That's incredible, man.
Yeah, it was. And, at the time, it was a difficult thing to do because I lived in the coal regions of Pennsylvania, which there weren't a whole lot of resources. I couldn't even buy like a tablet of Bristol board. And to get it printed, we had to drive like an hour and a half to find a printer who could just print a comic book.
I'm curious about that. What kind of print was it? Like, did it actually look like a comic book?
Yeah, well, it was the size of a comic book, but it would have been something like heavier than typewriter paper, heavier than printer paper.
It was more put together than just like photocopies stapled together or something like that.
No, it was because I did it. I also didn't know anything about how things were reproduced photographically. So I inked it with ballpoint pens and brushes and watercolor wash and shading with pencil and stuff like that. So it had to be shot as halftones.
What were your friends' reactions to being in the comic? Was anyone in there who didn't know they were going to be in there?
Well, I changed all the names, so nobody really thought of it too much that way. And the couple people that it was specific, true life stories, they were hugely supportive.
Just looking at like a history of you that's online, by the way, just so you know.
You're not going through my trash or something like that?
No. Outside of your house, right?
I don't know where you live at in Harrisburg. I was struck by how many different stories you've written. And I'm like, how's this guy writing from this perspective so well? I mean, where's your gold mine? Where are you getting all these ideas?
Well, there's a couple of parts to that, I guess. First off, the question I get asked most in regards to my other series, which is Amelia Rules, is, how did you write from the point of view of a young girl? And people ask it constantly, and they ask, how did you write for a different species? And it's weird because I always think, would anyone have gone up to Tolkien and go, you're not 4 foot tall and a slave to a ring for 500 years. So how did you write Gollum? And I think, honestly, if I couldn't write from the point of views and the perspectives that I've written from, I just couldn't be a writer. That's just part of it. You have to have empathy and understanding of all different types of people if you're going to try to write anything that has any kind of remote resonance with the real world. Mm-hmm. What I have an interest in is people. I have an interest in moments. I'll never be one of those people that goes, if I ever get Green Lantern, this is what I'm going to do. And then, run down like 12 plot points. For me, it has to be something that's really, really personal. It's got to be something that I'm even thinking a lot about or that I feel deeply about. Even if it's just something stupid, like one of the earliest Amelia stories about freeze tag, that does come from the fact that we used to play that a lot as a kid. And I just thought, I'd like to get that down on paper. I'm more likely to say, boy, vanilla ice cream's really good. I sure had a story about how good vanilla ice cream is, and then just string some moments together rather than come up with, a plot that drives the narrative.
I see. Wow. That's, that's really cool.
I know that's the opposite of a lot of what is done in comics, obviously, because if you're writing Spider-Man or something like that, you have to have a plot and you have to have the villain and you have to have all those sort of things. And I just don't know any villains in my life. I don't really see many plots around me either. One of the interesting things about doing the memoir was that, after writing 1,300 pages of Amelia, I did sort of understand how story structure worked. Mm-hmm. And I could bend it to do what I needed it to do for my motives, which was talking about those characters, talking about these, philosophical things, talking about, just things in the world that matter to me. When I went to write the memoir, it was a shock because I realized, this is the exact opposite of that, because, there is no story structure to your life whatsoever. And also, it's infinitely detailed. Any story, the best written story, even if you go to Tolkien or you go to James Joyce or whatever, it really has as few details as possible in order to make the story and the world believable, right? But real life is infinitely detailed. And I started realizing I could follow any one of these details down a blind path, write 20 or 30 pages, and realize it has no real value to the reader that's out there. And in that instance, what I had to do was come up with a story structure and say, this is the story I'm telling. Anything that does not fit this story, even if it's hugely important to my life, can't be in this book. And the story structure became how I became a cartoonist.
I think that's one of the traps that a lot of memoirs get caught in, because there are so many rabbit holes in your own life. And great memoirs follow they follow theme. They are about something. They can't be about everything. And so I think the trap is, interesting things have happened to me, therefore I can just write about that and it will be interesting. You've got to be able to, pare it down and figure out at its core what on earth it is that you're trying to say. And it sounds like you're doing that.
Well, yeah. And I think that's the question about all of art, which is, why are you doing this? One of the things that's sort of shocking to me when I look around the web, and you can see there's 18 million web strips, right? Oh. All of them are better drawn than I will ever draw in my life. They're gorgeous and stunning and all kinds of digital effects, and they look amazing. And I have no idea why most of them exist. I just think you have a worldwide audience. You have an unbelievable level of craft and ability. And this is the story that you want to tell. Why? And I don't know if it's because people think they're making, calculated commercial decisions about what type of story they're telling, or if they're just trying to emulate the comics or the movies or whatever it is that they liked from when they were a kid. But I see so little of someone saying, this is my personal thing. This is why I exist, and I want to share that with you. And I really think that's the whole point of art, is answering that question, why am I doing this?
We keep talking about Amelia Rules, and you mentioned self-publishing in the 90s. When did you start doing Amelia Rules?
I started Amelia in 2001, but what I had done before that was that comic book I did in high school. When I was, 20 years old, I decided to, try a crack at doing a version of that. It was called Shades of Grey Comics and Stories, because back then you could call something Shades of Grey and it wasn't, And I think, I was 15 when I came up with that title. I don't know what her excuse was, but so I did this comic book, and it was, self-published, black and white, slice of life comics. And it was during the time when self-publishing was a real boom. It was just after Bone, but kind of before Bone became the phenomenon it was about to become, because this would have been 1990, January of 1993. And it was a really exciting time. And one of my things I love music. I love rock and roll. And I grew up, like I said, in the 80s. So, the idea of a bunch of people in a van, hitting the road and seeing America was really romantic and exciting to me. And I got to do a version of that with self-publishing this comic book, because we would go to, one-day comic shows all over the country and just, plug away, slowly getting more and more readers. My very first order from a professional distributor for my first issue of Shades of Grey was 12 copies. And I think by the time all the orders were in for my first issue, it was maybe 200 copies, a little more, something like that. So I was pretty much dead in the water, but I had a little extra money saved. So I decided to do a second issue. And a guy from Capital City Distribution, which at the time was the second largest distributor, just found it in the slush pile, said, I really like it. I want to give it a shot, resolicited both issues. And that kind of gave it life. And I was able to do it. I self-published it for 12 issues, and then it was picked up by Caliber, which was a black and white publisher at the time, for another 4 issues. And I guess it was 4 years that I did it. So then I took a few years after that was over, and I still wanted to do comics. I wasn't sure. I thought maybe I'd want to do a comic strip. But I had this little girl character named Amelia. So I decided to start self-publishing, and I learned how to write a business plan, and I got investors. So I self-published Amelia for 20 issues of the regular comic book, and self-published 4 trade paperbacks. to the point that when Barnes & Noble and Borders started their kids graphic novel sections, Amelia was one of the titles in 2007 that they started with, and it was self-published. I don't think they would even have known. It was under a company called Renaissance Press, which is the name of the company. It was 4 of us. And, so we were able to I took self-publishing from the locker in my high school all the way to Barnes & Noble.
How did that feel, man? Like when you terrifying?
Terrifying, because it's all returnable.
Yeah, it's true.
The reason you could self-publish in comic books is because comic book stores were non-returnable, and so you printed as many as you needed and just a few extra for shows or whatever, and you could kind of just squeak by. But then we started getting to the point, we'd get 3,000 orders from Barnes & Noble for I don't know, I guess it was a $10.99 or $9.99 trade paperback, and you'd just be like, well, I hope they sell.
Yeah, right.
And they tell you when you self-publish, there's a couple things you'll never do. You'll never get your work translated into other languages. You'll never be able to sell into book fairs like the Book of the Month Club or the Scholastic Book Fair, and you'll never get in the chain stores. And we did all of those.
Wow.
Wow, man.
Mic drop.
Yeah. Boom.
So why did you need Simon & Schuster? You're already in Barnes & Noble.
Right.
Yeah, but then it becomes the type of thing that is taking up all your time. I didn't want to be a comic book publisher. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to, be a distributor. I didn't want to do any of these things, but that was the only way I could get this comic book out. There in 2001, people sort of forget. In 2001, it's not like the comic book industry was sort of apathetic to kids comics or comics with girls as the lead. They were actively hostile.
Wow.
They had just spent 20 years trying to convince you that somehow Batman was for adults and had done a really good job that somehow people go, yeah, Batman, that seems like a reasonable thing an adult should be interested in. And the last thing they wanted anyone to do is do a comic book for girls in full color. That was a kid's comic and a humor comic. It was just absolutely anathema to everything the comic book industry was about. But I wanted to do it. So the only way I was going to be able to do it was to publish it myself. But then, when you have 4 full color trade paperbacks in print. We also had done a best of digest for Scholastic book fairs. So that was a 5th trade paperback. They're in all these chain stores and independent bookstores that are returnable, unlike the comic book world. And it was just like, I need to be able to be free of all this, to be free of the worry that there's going to be some sort of crash or there's going to be massive returns or something like this. And I need to be able to finish this story that I started all those years ago. And the strangest thing happened. I mean, you can't plan for some of these things in life. I'm talking about plotting. You couldn't plot this. And if you plotted it in a story, people would laugh at you. I was on a panel at Book Expo America, and it was about kids comics. And they had given us the questions in advance. And there were 4 Amelia trades out at the time. No, 3 Amelia trades out at the time. And the last question was, what great kids comic from the past should be brought back? And I was going to say Power Pack, because I liked that when I was a kid. And then I'm sitting on the panel, and all I could tell you is that something popped into my head that said, say Zot. Not just Zot, but say Zot. And I had 2 seconds to think, what am I going to do? So I just said Zot. And it got this spontaneous applause. And so I started vamping on him like, yeah, Zot was great. Everyone knows Scott McCloud from Understanding Comics, but people forget Zot. And it was groundbreaking work. And everyone really responded to it. So the panel was over, and afterwards I'm back at my booth, and this woman comes over and she says, hi, I just wanted to tell you I was on that panel with you. And my name's Judy Hansen, and I'm Scott McCloud's agent. Wow. And I said, oh. She said, and here's the funny thing that happened. Just minutes before going into your panel, I was sitting with an editor from HarperCollins, and they passed on Zot. And you said Zot, and everyone applauded. And now the editor is saying, well, wait a second, maybe we'll rethink it.
No way.
HarperCollins ended up publishing a big black and white collection of Zot. So she said, if you have anything you're ever interested in doing, let me know. So I gave her some of my Amelia books, and she thought they were great. And like a year later, I said, I'm ready to do something. And she said, you need to be with one of the major trade publishers. And I said, well, how do you do that? She said, we'll put them up for auction. And that's what we did. So we approached 4 publishers, 3 bid on it. And it gave me the security to know that I was going to get to finish Amelia Rules. You know, they bought 4 books and with an option for 4 more. And it was great.
That story speaks to a lot of the problems in the comic books right now, where we're talking about not wanting to publish girls or kids, but that's a rant.
Movies too.
Oh,
You know, it's alive and well in animation, you know, too, like just how they treat women and yada yada. But that speaks to a lot of it.
Well, let me tell you, if you might want to go on a rant, I'll tell you a quick story that'll really enrage you. I guess this was probably near 2 or 3 of Amelia, and I got a call from a person who was a female executive at one of the big networks for kids, which will remain nameless. And she's like, you know, I think we could do a great Amelia animated show. What do you think about that? And I said, sure. She said, what would it be like? You know, put together a proposal. So I put together a proposal because I thought, it should be like the comic book, but on TV. No brainer.
Radical idea.
So like a month goes by and she goes, yeah, so here's the thing. We're going to have to pass. I'm like, okay. So the problem with Amelia Rules is there's too much content in it. And the thing is, girls don't need content. What girls need is like a cute icon that they can latch onto. And then, you know, they buy all the stuff. But the more story and the more depth you give to the property, the more damaging it is if it's a girl's property. And you go, all right, well, thank you for showing me how horrible you are.
What does that even mean?
What does it mean?
And this was a woman. So there you go. If you want to really have your blood boil, that's...
It worked. It worked.
I'm speechless right now, man.
Well, imagine me being on the other end of the phone going like, what is this? Is this a prank call? I don't understand. And also, it's not like she pursued me. Did you not look at it? Did they only look at the cover and think it was a cute?
Maybe the numbers.
Maybe. I don't know.
What in the world?
So there you go.
Well, yeah, that's I'm just I'm packing down. I'm packing the stories down, so I don't just accidentally hijack the episode with ranting about other issues.
Yeah.
Well, there you go, friends. Girls don't need content.
There, done.
Outrageous.
Aren't you glad you listened to the Paper Wings show so we can bring you insights into the industry such as this?
In the position she was at the time.
Well, and you know, it's interesting. There's even a fundamental assumption here that only girls are going to watch the show because it has a girl
in it.
Yeah.
And that exists to this day, even in publishing. They'll say boys will read about boys and girls will read about either, but boys won't read about girls. And, you know, to me, one of the life-changing books was Harriet the Spy. I mean, I saw that book and I couldn't believe something so great existed. And it never once dawned on me until, honestly, I was an adult and people were telling me that boys won't read about girls. And, you know, and I didn't grow up in a really feminized culture. It was, you know, the hard coal region, you know,
right. Pennsylvania.
And I never once thought about, I'm reading about a girl. It was just a great character. Right. Who cares?
Good story. People will read good stories, you know, like it doesn't matter.
I was going to say, I get that all the time with Dreamer. And I'll have guys come up to me at comic conventions. It's almost like they need my assurance that they can buy the book.
Is this okay?
Like do guys read this? And I'm like, I meet more men than women who read my comics at comic conventions. And I'm sure part of that is attendance and who's attending in that. But, you know, it's okay, guys, to read a story that has a woman in the lead. That it's not a threat to your masculinity at all.
Yeah, could you imagine being so insecure? Am I allowed to read this comic book as a 40-year-old man? You know, why don't you just do what you want to do and relax?
Just imagine if it was reversed. Imagine if it was a girl wondering if it was okay to read a book about a male protagonist. You know, it's like that seems, you know, that doesn't even fit. That doesn't even seem like that would be something that would happen. Right. And yet,
Well, I mean, it extends into, you know, female authors, you know, J.K. Rowling, not her full name, you know, because they were trying to trick people to thinking it was a man.
Wow.
Oh, my God.
And then they'll say, well, you know, people know she's a woman now, but they wouldn't have at the time. And there's anything that disproves it. It's just an exception. It will never change.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, the whole paradigm. So.
Yeah, right. It's amazing. Yeah. So make your own projects, guys. Just
Yeah.
I mean, quite literally, you're helping to heal the world by doing things that are good and true. You know.
Yeah, I actually do think that's true. You know, and with the access the web has these days for people to put their own voice out there, it's an amazing time.
Yeah.
I think that's what's so exciting about webcomics. When I first started doing The Dreamer as a webcomic, I didn't read them. So I had to catch up really fast. And having only read print comics, my whole world exploded at seeing so many women making comics and so many stories that weren't just superheroes or horror comics. Or, you know, it wasn't the Vertigo or the Marvel that was out there. It was just a full spectrum of stories. And there were so many women and they were so talented. And, I just had no idea that was going on in the world. And, you know, you don't need the publisher. There's no gatekeeper to the web.
Right.
It's only access to an audience. And if you're connecting with an audience, you can sell a story online.
You know, real quick, and then we can move on because I really want to talk about your art. But when you're trying to break in as you know, because I grew up on comics, I'm just like you. I learned how to read from reading an X-Men comic.
Yeah.
And you grew up like I'm going to work for Marvel or DC or whatever. But then once you become a pro at any part of the industry, you're pining to tell your own story. You know, like so you try so hard to get into one of these publishers, and then you finally get in and you're like, you know what, now I really want to just do my own thing, you know. And basically you're sort of one of like, you know, the heroes where you can have an awesome, you know, creative life by telling stories that you love. I mean, you know, it's not stressful. So basically this is just like a verbal slow clap for you.
Well, and on that note, I love, Jimmy, that this came out of you not knowing how to do it and, you know, making finger quotes like, I don't know how this is done. And so you did it wrong. And then look what happened. It's just great.
It's shocking because when I go back and I look at those first comic books, which I had to do the memoir, which was painful. But I look at it and I go, yeah, but you know what? Your voice, it's rough and it's horribly done. But that's somehow I knew that my voice was the important thing. It wasn't my drawing ability for sure. It wasn't my plotting ability. But there was something about my voice that was a little bit different. And I think it's because of what my friend said when he said, write a comic book about us. It seems so dumb and seems so, I mean, it's write what you know, right? It's a cliche almost. But for me, it was this absolutely profound thing.
So did you find that after going to Simon Schuster, the things that you hoped would happen, like you said, like, I don't really want to be a comics publisher. I just want to make comics. Did that happen?
To a fault in some ways, because something people should really know is that even if you're published by the largest publishers in the world, I mean, Simon Schuster is the biggest American publisher and Scholastic is the largest children's publisher in the world. You're still responsible for promoting your work. You're still responsible for, you know, doing interviews. You're still responsible for doing school visits and public appearances and signings and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, for the Simon & Schuster sent me on tour. So they took care of that for like the first 6 months or whatever. But after that, I did sort of drift into just being a hermit who drew these comics. And while that's fun and kind of the dream, you do really still need to be active in promoting your own work. And you also need to take an active interest in how your work is being presented and how it's being sold and all those sorts of things. And if anything, self-publishing should have and did, now that I've, you know, woken up from my trance, you know, prepare me to be able to do that sort of stuff. Because when you're self-publishing, you are literally responsible for all of it. Mm-hmm. When you get published, you still kind of are. They have sales forces and they have promotions people, and they do an amazing job. And, you know, Scholastic has sent me all over the country this year to promote it. But when it comes down to it, you know, I still have to maintain a web presence, and I still have to, you know, do dozens and dozens and dozens of school visits and get the word out that way. It's just until you get to the point where you are, you know, J.K. Rowling or Stephen King or someone like that, that's what you're going to be doing.
There have been a couple times you've mentioned the word writer, and, you know, referring to yourself. This might be the wrong question to ask, but do you think of yourself as more of a writer or more of an artist? And I don't know. I guess most people I talk to who start making comics as a kid, it's from the visual art aspect. You know, that's sort of the point at which they kind of begin, and then they sort of evolve into more of a writer. that ends up being their path. Was that the case for you, or, and then how do you think of yourself now as compared to the way you got started?
Well, right now, I would think of myself as a cartoonist, because that's like saying Jedi Knight to me. That is, that's the highest thing a human can aspire to be. That's the job Charles Schultz had. So that's cool. I think I end up saying writer largely because I'm dealing with mainstream book publishers. And when you start doing these talks, and they always refer to you as an author, they'll say the author of the graphic novel. And it just becomes sort of a weird, just thing you get into. But for me, I would consider myself a cartoonist. I'm sure when I started out as a kid, I had interest in drawing first. That was the thing that I liked doing the most. I would sit and spend hours and hours drawing. But I don't think I actually have any real natural talent as an artist. I think if I have a natural ability, it's to make comics. I can somehow put words together with pictures, and they're both good enough to make something that hopefully is kind of special.
Can you connect the dots a little bit there as to how the mechanics of the Scholastic deal, how that actually happened, down to the nitty gritty of who called and what was actually involved? It's, you hear a lot of stories about people breaking in that way, but it's still vague, and I think for people who haven't gone through it, it's still really no, what really happens? Well,
are you talking about the Scholastic deal for the memoir, or the Simon & Schuster deal for Amelia Rules, which was the first?
Well, I said Scholastic because I have been thinking about them a lot lately, but really either one, because I'm really, what I'm actually trying to...
How do you break into that world?
Exactly. And just what really happens, and actually, I guess we could extend that with a question of, were they different, or was it basically the same, kind of working with each of those, with the big dogs?
All right. Yeah. Well, okay. How long is your podcast?
As long as it needs to be.
Yeah.
Okay. So 2002, I have no comic books in print, or I have 5 issues of Amelia out, and we're about ready to go belly up, because they're selling 2,000, 3,000 copies, something like that, which is not enough for a full color book. And I meet a guy named Harold Buchholz, who I had actually known a little bit from the past. And he'd always wanted to work with me. And he was an all ages print broker. He's like, can I help you with some project? I just want to work on Amelia with you. And I said, well, I need a trade paperback, but I don't have any money. He said, well, do you have any back stock? And I said, yeah, I have 1,200 copies of these first 5 issues. He's like, I can turn those into a trade paperback. And he stripped the covers off, and he took the staples out, and he got them square bound, and they were a beautiful trade paperback. And we took them to San Diego that year, and we sold out.
Wow.
And suddenly we were in the black again. And two people bought comics that day. One was a guy named David Saylor, and one was a guy named Byron Price. And Byron Price acted more quickly, and he was the publisher of a book line called iBooks. This was obviously before the Mac iBook. And he just showed a bunch of kids' comics to his daughter and said, which one of these should we publish? And she said, I think Amelia is funny. I think you should do Amelia Rules. Wow. So he contacted me and said, we're distributed through Simon & Schuster, but we're an independent imprint, and we would love to publish 2 of your graphic novels. So I got a deal suddenly doing graphic novels through iBooks. The other guy who came by that day was slower. His name, David Saylor. He's actually the guy in charge of graphics at Scholastic. Uh-huh. And he said, we'd be interested in possibly doing Amelia. And it was too late. I had already gone with this small little publisher, iBooks. So Amelia could have possibly been part of Scholastic from just after their launch with Bone, very early on in the game.
Wow.
But it wasn't meant to be. So iBooks put out 2 editions of Amelia into the bookstores, into the chains and stuff like that. But they were $14.95. They were shaped comic book sized. They were just wrong on every possible. They just didn't work. And then he got hit by a bus.
Oh my God.
Literally?
And died. Yes. In his car. No. Yes. Yes, I know. And so deal with this. This was one of the turning points of my life. I got the rights to my book back. Right. And you have to think, what a horrible, horrible thing to have happened. He was a really great guy. I mean, for anyone out there, Byron Price, Google him. He was actually kind of a visionary, and he was one of the earliest graphic novel publishers and a great guy. But I got the rights back to my book. And by that
Wow.
point, the Scholastic ship had kind of sailed, and I didn't know what to do. And so I hired Harold, the same guy who had put together that first, jerry-rigged graphic novel. And we said, we're going to go all in. And we printed the first 3 Amelia books on hardcover and softcover. And we brought 250 or 300 copies. We got them printed in South Korea, and he was over there for a week and monitoring them. And, everything was riding on this. If they didn't work, there was no money. I know it sounds like we had a lot of money at this point, but we really didn't. And so they had to work. We came back to San Diego. He arrived the day the show was starting, the Comic-Con was starting. And we set up all of them, and we sold out of all of them. And we signed with Diamond Books. And that's when we took on that journey of selling into the trade shows or to the chain stores and all that sort of stuff. So what happened then was I signed with this agent, Judy Hansen, and she said, the way we're going to do this is an auction, meaning we are going to tell a number of publishers that this is available, and we're going to give them a very detailed presentation. Obviously, they have 4 books to look at. They're going to have an idea of what the next 4 books are going to be. All the sales figures you've had, all the success you've had selling into Scholastic book fairs, translations into other languages, the free comic book day things you've done, all that stuff is going to go into this presentation. And we're going to approach the 4 most likely publishers. And like I said, one wasn't interested because they just weren't interested. They didn't want to do kids comics, so that was fine. So 3 of them were interested, and I don't want to get into which ones they were, but Simon and Schuster won, and they won by a pretty substantial margin. And actually what it was is, they come back and they say, this is how much money we're going to offer you for this series and for however many books we want to do. This is our marketing plan and how much we're going to spend on it. And then I got to pick which one I wanted, which sounds like that couldn't possibly have happened, but it really did happen.
Incredible.
Yeah, it was. Well, I woke up one person and went to sleep another person. And it was a life-changing day. And one of the reasons I picked Simon and Schuster, aside from the money, was that they were going to go commit to 4 more books as opposed to committing to 2 books or 1 book and with an option for another one. And that made me go, I can write to this. I can say, I know what this is. And the thought of going piece by piece, I needed to be able at the end of the day, write the end on it and go, I completed it. And I didn't want it that part being taken out of my hands. I couldn't deal with. So they said, we commit to 4 more. That sealed it for me. I said, fine, I'll go with you guys.
What did you actually do at that point? You say, yes,
you ran
relationship. We have the DTR, and then now what? How long does that take? What do you sign? What did you have to get a lawyer involved? What? Well,
my agent is a lawyer.
Okay.
Yeah, but so no, it's a gigantic, epic contract that makes no sense to any possible human that could ever understand English. And on top of this, just saying these things out loud in the sequence of 1 hour-long interview, it just sounds insane. Because the day I went to sign it was the day the stock market crashed in 2008. And I had no idea what was going on. Everyone's really tense at Simon & Schuster. And I'm like, hey, it's a great day. They're like, do you have all the pages on a drive? I'm like, yeah. And the assistant grabbed it and ran with it. And I thought, oh, wow, this is New York. This is what they do. And, and they're racing the contract down, and I signed the contract, and they race it back out. And then the assistant comes back into the editor, and she's like, is everything okay? And yeah, everything's good. Oh, great. Then everyone relaxed. What I didn't know is any contract that wasn't fully executed that day was put on indefinite hold, because the publishing companies work entirely on credit. They don't actually have all that cash to publish the books that they're publishing. It's just an enormous amount of money. So suddenly the credit was going to dry up. So I know other people who were signing deals at that time that, some of them never got their books out. Some of them, it took 3-4 years for a book to come out and no money up front. But I walked out with a really nice check and, and an 8-book deal, which is absolutely crazy. And they offered me Monday or Friday to come up for the signing of the contract. And if I would have picked Friday, I wouldn't have had it.
Wow.
That is unbelievable.
How do you submit what they review? Do you write scripts or you draw scripts?
Yeah, I draw scripts.
Okay.
First thing I'll do is an outline, which is generally actually to get the book purchased. They have to have something so they know what they're buying. Mm-hmm. And then from that, I'll actually go in and I'll do thumbnails on printer paper with pencil for the whole book. And then they can edit that. Really, by the time you're getting the finished art done on illustration board and, they're getting the Photoshop files after I color it, there's not really storytelling editing. There's copy editing. Mm. All the storytelling, editing, and tweaking happens at those thumbnail page stages.
That's a good transition to something I wanted to ask you about is your lettering. You hand letter all of your books, right?
Yeah, a couple times I got lazy and used a handmade font, but yeah, I think the vast majority of them are hand lettered. Like the memoirs hand lettered. Most of the Amelia ones are.
So what does that look like when you're translating into other languages?
Well, it looks like a font. I mean,
okay, that's how they do that.
Yeah, there's no way to avoid that really. And sometimes I do think the hand lettering, it's okay for the word balloons, but I do things with, again, influenced by Cerebus. I'll do just like fancy display lettering, and I'll do characters' voices in different styles. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the great things that a comic book can do that no other medium can do. But it's hard to make that a smooth transition when it's going to be lettered in German by someone who doesn't know what you were really trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. And it only has, a Mac and a couple fonts to use.
I think so much of your characters and your humor, it comes out in the lettering. I think if somebody translated that with just using a font, you would lose a lot of the spirit of the comic.
Yeah.
That way.
Yeah, I think you do.
I want to talk about a little bit about your drawings. Mm-hmm. One of the things, like when I'm doing a portfolio review, one of the things that, can sort of jump out really quick is line confidence. Mm-hmm. When somebody's drawing a line, it's like they don't know which line they want to select. Mm-hmm. Or, where they want the line to go. So they draw like 19 different lines. Right. And like, which I don't know what's forming the structure, but I mean, you seem to have that down pretty well. I mean, is that something that, you worked on purpose, or just drawing thousands and thousands of pages of a comic? Is this something you just developed? I mean,
yeah, nothing beats just drawing thousands of pages. I honestly don't think I have any natural ability as an illustrator. I think I have just pig-headed determination to doing it, and I enjoy the physical process of drawing. I like, so I'm happy to sit and work on it.
Yeah, I really love your art style, because it's like this super mix of cartoons and comics. Like you say, you're a cartoonist, and yeah, that's one of the things that jumped out to me looking at your Tumblr website, that one of the images you have up is I guess you did a page in blue pencil, and I was like, dude, that's the stuff that gets me going in the morning. The drawings are so confident and beautiful. It looks really cool.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I wish I could say I was actually confident while I'm doing it, but yeah, one of the things that I think my first series, when I was doing the Shades of Grey series, suffered from was the fact that I was actually trying to draw in ways that I wasn't capable of. Mm. I wasn't really influenced by Cerebus. I was really influenced by Jaime Hernandez. And, those drawing styles are beyond my abilities. When I started Amelia, I was like, I just want to draw for fun like I drew when I was a kid. And it came out this kind of cartoony style. And then when I was drawing in my wheelhouse, then I had confidence and thought, I can do this.
Well, Jimmy, we have to get your perspective on breaking in. And, the more time that goes by and the more that sort of the creator culture becomes the mainstream, the harder this question is to even think about. But nonetheless, I'm interested in your thoughts on this. A lot of our listeners, they have these stories in their hearts and in their minds that they just got to get out into the world. But then they also are faced with the daily reality of having to pay the bills and raise their families. And, very often, the friction of getting the stories and the sort of the most authentic creations, the things closest to their hearts, there's friction between that desire and the reality of having to pay the bills. And whether that's through freelance illustration or through graphic design or through a job that is, not related to art or creating things, what advice can you give them, especially given your very unorthodox approach to a creative career?
Here's my advice. Suck it up. Mm-hmm. Because There are so many people that I've seen over the years that are talented. They've come up and they're like, I'm going to publish this, but I have a girlfriend. It's like, shut up. I don't want to hear about your girlfriend. I had an art career. I was a graphic designer and art director at a TV station. That was not an easy job. It was 45 plus hours a week at times. I had a family, twin daughters that were infants in 2003 when I was in the heart of doing Amelia. And I would work all day. I would come home, I'd help with dinner or whatever, and I'd play with the kids. And then I would start drawing Amelia Rules at like 10 o'clock at night. And I would stay up till 5 or 6 in the morning, get a few hours of sleep, and go to work. And if you don't want it that bad, I don't want to hear about it. That's really what it is. It's like, I want to be a swimmer, but I'm not crazy about getting wet. That's just part of it. It's just absolutely part of it. And you're going to have to find a balance. You're going to have to find a job that either allows you to have a flexible schedule, or depending on your personality type, something that's creative and then feeds your other creativity, or something that's completely not creative and allows you to save that creativity for something else. That depends on the person. But the reality is, you just have to find the time to do the work. And if the work's not that important, that you're not willing to start drawing your comic at 11 o'clock at night and keep doing it till 6 in the morning, then you don't want it bad enough. It's how many free throws did Michael Jordan have to shoot? It's just part of the process. And the other thing I think people have to get out of their minds is that their work will someday be perfect. Mm-hmm. And they're waiting for it to be perfect before they unleash it on the world. It will never, ever be perfect. I don't care if you're Charles Schultz. I don't care who you are. It's never going to be perfect in your mind. It better not. Otherwise, you're just kidding yourself.
Right.
You really need to just be able to say, this was the best I could do in this situation at this time. I think it has value for the audience. It says what I was trying to say, and then put it out there and just, let the cards fall where they may. The chips fall. The cards don't fall. The chips fall.
Well, the cards do fall sometimes.
That's true. That's true.
It takes a long time to clean that up.
Right.
I know for me, it was quitting stuff. It was a pivotal moment for me. Like, what do I need out of life right now? What am I flailing for? And anyway, so my point is that, a lot of it is like, what can you cut out? If it just like Jimmy's saying, it's like, how bad do you want it? And what are you willing to not do? And if you really, I think most people, if you just look at your life with that kind of scrutiny, you'll find things. Like, you'll find room, and it's not going to be perfect, but you'll find space. You can clear space most of the time. Not 95% of the people I talk to about this, if you just sit down and work it out, you will create space. You can create space.
Oh, agree. The other thing I always do is, like, someone will talk about that. And I just don't have time. I go, oh, I know. Well, did you see the last Game of Thrones? They're like, yeah. Well, there you go. Don't watch Game of Thrones. That'll save you an hour a week or whatever. How much time do you spend on Facebook, on the internet, reading links to things you have no interest in? The whole world is designed to be a time suck. Yeah. At this point, you can find the time. I mean, yes, eventually at some point you can't. You're going to reach a tipping point and you can't do anymore, and then something has to go. But if something has to go, it should really be the passive time suck stuff that is just not doing anything. I don't think anyone got to the end of their life and thought, thank God I watched all that television. That was really edifying for me. I would rather have, if it came down to however much more fun I could have had in, the first decade of this century, or have those 8 Amelia books, it's no contest. I want those 8 Amelia books. And that was fun. Even though it was hard, and even though it was a struggle, and it was fun. I mean, my parents, my family was coal miners. So it's hard for me to go, oh man, I cartoon so much, dude. It's brutal. I have ink lung, it's just not,
oh my God.
It's just not a thing. So I have to remember, this is supposed to be fun. Mm-hmm. And if it's not fun, and it is more fun to watch Game of Thrones or whatever, then maybe you don't want it bad enough. And that not wanting it bad enough is actually okay too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I would say it is to a degree. I mean, if you're actually, skipping out on life, if it's there's a point at which that is really unhealthy too. It's all about the balance. It's like, well, workaholism can kill you, so can, just complete passivity. So,
right.
It's like,
yeah, but I mean, from the point of view of someone who goes, I'm going to just put out one comic this year. It's 8 pages. I'm going to put it up on the web, and that's it. That could be fine for them, because it could be
hobbies are okay.
Totally satisfying hobby.
Yeah. And that's great. Yeah. Good. Do that. It's just it's important, isn't it? It's important to really reckon with those expectations and ask yourself what are you even really trying to achieve?
Right.
And maybe you're not trying to achieve, Amelia rules. That's okay.
Yeah.
A lot of people ask you for advice, and it's very clear because you had a very well packaged answer there. It was very concise with a follow up elaboration. Very, very well done. But what are common mistakes you see, in the work that you're asked to, review, or even if it's not in the actual work, but just in the thought process of people who are coming to you for advice?
A few years ago, someone came up to me with a comic at Comic-Con and said, would you just look at it? It was self-published, and it was beautiful. It was like this funny animal adventure type thing, like a lighter version of Mouse Guard or something like that. It was really, really sweet and well done. And it was like a 48-page comic. And I said, well, how long did it take you to do this? And they're like, it took me all year. I'm like, okay. So I read it, and I got to the end, and it said end of prologue A. And it's like, okay, that's a big problem, because this took you a year and we're at the end of prologue A. You need to be able to set your sights on something that you can accomplish. The first Amelia story is 10 pages long. Amelia I didn't sit down and go, this character's cute. I will devote a decade plus to her life, and I will write 1,300 pages. I was like, this character's cute. I'm going to write a 10-page story about Freeze Tag. And let's see if that's anything. And then actually what I did was I sent it off to Dave Roman, who's a cartoonist and who at the time was the comics editor at Nickelodeon Magazine. And I said, look, I know this is too long for your magazine, but what do you think? And he said, I think you really know these characters. I think it's really funny and well done, and you should self-publish it as a comic book. But if I would have sent him 10 pages that led nowhere, he would have probably not written back to me at all. It's just such an obvious mistake. And I think that's the biggest one. People set challenges for themselves that they can't meet, and then they quit. And I think if they would just sit there and go, all right, I know I have limited time. I know I have limited resources, but I can find time to do an 8-page story. That'll be more satisfying and get you to the next level faster than doing the first 8 pages of your 3,000-page opus that is never going to be finished. Then from a standpoint of just like technical things, pacing is huge. But I see this, and now I've started for the first time in a long time reading Marvel comics, which I haven't read in years, but I'm just sort of curious partly because my daughters are into the Marvel movies, so I bought them a few. And the pacing is so horrible. It's like people they haven't read, they haven't digested, like really good comic storytellers like Jaime Hernandez or Dave Sim or someone like Wendy Pini or Alan Moore, people who know how to to make that comic book page work as a unit that gives you not just the information that these things happened, but this is how the people felt. This is the amount of time it took. This is the important thing. These are sub moments. You really have to work on that type of pacing in order to give a really satisfying reading experience to people. When I look at the last Marvel comic I read, which I won't name, it's because it's by a guy who I really admire. I just thought this is like a Cliff's Notes or some sort of summary of what would be a story.
Yeah.
But there was 12 word balloons in one panel with 2 characters looking at them is not good comics. That needs to be broken out over panels so that the dialogue has a rhythm to it. And I think people need to go back and look at the masters that could really do that. Even someone like Dan DiCarlo and, the guy, I can't think of the guy's name, who wrote those stories for him in Archie Comics, which I wasn't a fan of as a kid, but started reading as an adult and realizing, this is like bread and butter comic storytelling. This is how you do it. And it doesn't mean you have to tell those kind of stories. You can add layers and layers and layers to that, but you really need to know how to pace it. Think about comics I loved as a kid in Marvel and DC before I went to that comic store and found all that other stuff, was the Judas Contract in the Teen Titans. And it was all character. It was masterfully told. It was set up for like a year and a half in advance or whatever. And it was just so great. And it was heartbreaking because they took the time to get to know those characters. And I remember the first kiss between Changeling, he was called at the time, and Tara, the girl that ends up betraying him, happens right, pages before she makes this betrayal of the whole group. And without that moment, it's just a plot point and then she became bad and betrayed them. But when it has this little moment where they take a half page to show this kiss and it's so sweet, it makes it devastating when she betrays them.
Right.
I remember there was this moment, my girls were like 3 or 4 years old, 4 years old, I guess. And it was a really, really hot day and the air conditioning in the house was broken and they were miserable and grumpy. And they had only seen Superman as part of the Super Friends, the comic books I had laying around, and the old Fleischer Brothers cartoons. So I put in the DVD of the first Superman movie, but I just queued it up to the helicopter scene. And they're like, "What's this?" And I just wouldn't answer them. And they're looking at it. "What's happening to that lady?" Like, "Oh my God, Daddy, what's happening to that lady?" And they're like sitting on the edge of their seat, right? And Clark Kent comes out and the hat falls. They're like, "What's going on? Is she going to fall?" And the music starts swelling and they start standing up. And then he runs across the street and opens up his shirt and there's the big S and they jump up. It's Superman.
Wow.
If you can't do that, it doesn't matter how many millions of dollars you have. It doesn't matter anything else that you put, any other intellectual thought you put into it. If you don't have that moment where someone just goes, "Oh," they just give their heart to it. It doesn't matter. It's just noise. It's just something that will occupy people's time and attention. And they'll say the effects were really good. I mean, the effects were good in The Wizard of Oz. It doesn't matter. If you can't give that moment, just give it up. Forget it. Gownley out.
So, Jimmy, do you have a resource that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, if I were to pick one thing for anybody to go out and check out, I would pick The Cerebus Guide to Self-Publishing by Dave Sim, which talks about the comic self-publishing movement and philosophy, starting from the very basics of getting your ideas through choosing what types of tools you're going to use to distribution and printing. And I understand in the most recent edition, it talks about the web a bit too. It's primarily culled from essays from the 1990s and that were published in the Cerebus comic book. But for me, as just a basic textbook of understanding how comic books work, both creatively and from a business standpoint, that is what I would pick.
This podcast is a production of the Oatley Academy of Visual Storytelling. Laura Innes and I, Chris Oatley, produce the show, and we co-host with Justin Copeland. Our production manager is Anya Marcos, and our editor is Kevin Chandler. We are a proud member of the Visual Voice Podcasting Network, and you can find all of our available shows at chrisoatley.com/shows.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, maybe we should all sing. Of course,
all right.
Laura would no doubt give a lackluster.
Circle.
Oh, maybe not. If it's the Circle of Trust song, of course, she's fully on.
How is that song? Circle of Trust.
It's like a bluegrass two-step thing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the circle of trust. If you don't have one,
Pfizer is a Kickstarter. Donating's a must.
Is that a slap?
God.
Is he slapping his knee? Because that's
no, that was applause.
Superior
effort.
Today on the Paper Wings podcast, interview with Simon & Schuster and Scholastic cartoonist Jimmy Gownley.
Nope.
I realized that halfway through. Okay, wait. I'm gonna type it into the text so I can read it. I forgot halfway through. What did we say?
Interview with Jimmy Gownley. Wait, what?
You don't know it either.
Okay, you want me to start again?
Yeah.
Elevate.
you got it, Bucko.
All right. I don't know the words to the warm-up song. Elevate your visual storytelling with the Elevate your visual storytelling with the Paper Wings Show. I'm Chris Oatley, former Disney. Why can't I speak? I'm Chris Oatley, former Disney visual development.
Just keep going, man. Finish the whole sentence.
We just got to get through it once.
Yeah, just finish the whole sentence.
I'm Chris Oatley, former Disney visual development artist and founder of the Oatley Academy of Visual Storytelling. That was terrible.
All right. So
I think you're trying very hard to enunciate Paper Wing Show at the beginning, but it's losing some life.
Okay. I'll work on that. Paper Wing Show.
So yeah, what do you think?
Paper Wing Show.
Paper
You're,
Wing Show.
you're so good when we're actually recording.
See, this is why I did it. Open pit barbecue sauce. It gets all that stuff out.
What do you say? What about
Open
pit barbecue sauce.
sauce.
They have open pit in Ohio, right?
Yep.
Oh,
Wait, what
man,
is that?
for real?
I don't
Jealous.
understand what that is.
It's a barbecue sauce. It's called open pit.
Barbecue sauce.
Yeah, but it's
And it helps you say the right
sauce.
sounds.
well, it just gets your mouth all warmed up because open pit. Just like
Open pit.
yeah, open pit barbecue sauce. And then we
There
do
are-
it.
There are almost no P's or B's in this entire
Open
intro.
pit.
Peppermint.
Copeland.
Copeland. Open pit barbecue.
Storyboard.
And then we do it to the scale,
Justin.
Open pit
Justin.
barbecue
Justin.
sauce. Open pit
Justin
barbecue
Copeland.
sauce. Open pit barbecue sauce.
Justin.
Justin. See?
Justin.
See? My kids have it too, man. Tell me.
puts the lotion
Your kids call you Justin.
Nairi does. She pronounces it.
They don't call you dad?
No, I mean, yeah. Sometimes Vivian would be like, Justin. And it's hilarious.
Pass the ketchup, Justin.
Justin.
Come get me
Bonjour, Justin.
All right.
Au revoir, Justin. Okay.
I think that sounded great.
Let's stop the recording and do this again.